Hate in the U.S. My first guest tonight speaks with authority about the white supremacist movement in America because she used to be a member. Shannon Foley Martinez describes herself as a former violent white supremacist who was able to change her heart and mind. She now works with the Free Radicals Project to help prevent radicalization of young Americans. She joins me tonight from our Washington, D.C. studio. Shannon, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. Your story is fascinating. You entered the white supremacist movement when you were 15 years old. What was it about your childhood that made you susceptible?
I always felt like I was the black sheep in my family. I never felt like I had a really deep sense of belonging. And then that expanded as I got older. And then I would be sexually assaulted when I was 14 years old. And the rage that came after that had me looking for those who exhibited rage. And the angriest people around me were the white supremacist skinheads that were around me.
And your family was not, I assume your family wasn't a strong bulwark against that then?
I didn't grow up in an overly racist household. It was relatively dysfunctional, but there was no overt violence. For the most part, my childhood echoes the childhoods of most of the people that grew up alongside me in the 1980s. There was nothing that anyone would have seen in my life that would have alerted them at that point that my trajectory would go towards violent white supremacy.
And I understand when you were around 20 years old, you began to leave the white supremacist movement. And how did that happen?
I ended up not really having a place to live, and I was very luckily taken in by a woman who displayed courageous compassion and chose to let me come live in her home, and rather than seeing the vile and hate-filled creature that I had become, chose to see me instead as a hurting and struggling young woman. And the stability and the unconditional acceptance that she gave allowed me to begin to disengage from this hate-filled ideology that had been so much of my life for the last 5 years.
And, you know, in those 5 years, Shannon, I mean, you described yourself as a former violent white supremacist. I mean, were you waking up in the mornings thinking about, okay, which non-white person can I find today to hurt or to do bodily harm to? I mean, was that how your days were comprised for those 5 years?
Very often, yes. Towards the end, it actually became more militaristic, and we worked training with arms and strategic maneuvers. You know, we sought to do as much damage as we possibly could and spread the message of hate and white supremacy everywhere we knew it would be the most upsetting.
And did you ever have the order, or did you ever have the task of going out to actually kill people?
No, and much like today, even though I've been disengaged for 25 years, it was still very much a leaderless movement. Mm-hmm. So there weren't there wasn't a hierarchy of orders coming down. That very much, even though I lived with a bunch of other white supremacists, that it very much was sort of an organic choice of things to do. And often the violence that we undertook, whether it was fights or violent harassment of people or targeted flyering of synagogues or places of worship, that a lot of times it actually just sort of happened spur of the moment.
Mm-hmm. You tweeted a couple of days ago something about parents and children in the U.S. We want to show our viewers this tweet. You write, parents of white kids, you are not powerless to keep your kids from being radicalized into white nationalism, alt-right, alt-light, far-right belief systems. The government isn't going to act, so we must. So, Shannon, tell me, what do parents in the United States, what do they need to do now?
Well, in addition to my past, I also am the mom of 7 children. My oldest is 22, my youngest is 3. And so this has been my life for the last 22 years. How do I help human beings never look to the same things that I did? How do I help them thrive so that hate and violence is never part of their life? White people in America have got to look at our children and think, my child is potentially a white supremacist terrorist, and we have to just deal with that fact because we live in a white supremacist system that has been in place for hundreds of years, and we still have not dismantled the realities and the systems that are in place with that. But as parents, we can talk about white supremacy, we can talk about violence, we can talk about systems of power, and most importantly, we can offer the antidotes to the things that allow people to find resonance with those ideologies in the first place. We can allow their voices to have agency and help them determine their futures. We can honor the paths and the identities that they are trying on as part of the process of childhood, that we can connect deeply with them, that we can make sure that they always feel like they have a place to belong. We can let them fail and falter and still support them and be an integral part of their lives. We have got to talk to them about everything, that our world is so complex and young people are starving for dialogue about the complexities of the world that they face, and we can give that to our children.
Well, you know, but what you're describing there is what a good and what a decent parent should do. And as you say, there appears to be a shortage of that in modern society. I'm going to ask you about the government. What is the government not doing that you think it should? I mean, have the Republicans, have they given up everything to Trump?
I think that it's politically expedient to stoke fears, particularly creating fears of whatever group of people that you want to other. So in America, that is very often Black people, very, very blatantly the Hispanic population, that stoking those fears is politically expedient. If people are afraid, they're easily controlled, they're easily manipulated. It's easy to get them to vote against their best interests. And so there is, in some sense, a real strategic advantage to not addressing the historic racism that's a part of our country. Hitherto, it hasn't been done. Trump's response was, yes, we'll have gun control and we'll tie it to immigration reform.
Yeah, that's what he's...
So more of the same.
More of the same. How culpable do you think he is in the increase that we've seen in the U.S. of white supremacist violence?
Well, I think his language is incredibly culpable. Not only that, but other right-wing influencers in the mainstream media and the mainstream political realm have utilized conspiracy theories that are very popular amongst the far right and alt-right, that they've mainstreamed those ideas. The words that we say affect how we think, which affects how we act. And so the strategic messaging that is coming out of the White House and many within the Republican Party is incredibly influential, probably in ways that a lot of people are not even aware of how that language is influencing their beliefs and how they're acting.
Shannon, let me ask you, in the U.S., do you watch Fox News?
Very occasionally. Very occasionally.
Okay.
It's not by any means my main news source, but I do consume it to understand and better have a finger on the pulse of what the people who watch it are consuming.
And let me ask you, before we run out of time, you know that President Trump is supposed to travel to El Paso, Texas tomorrow. Some people have said that he's not welcome there. Others want him to try to be the consoler in chief. Should the president travel to El Paso tomorrow, in your opinion?
Well, as a mom, one of the things that I have learned is to ask my children what they need from me. Do you need me just to listen? Would you like my input? Would you like my advice? What do you need from me here? If he is really going to be a strong leader, finding out what the people of that city want would be a step of leadership. If they are saying, we are not ready and we do not want you here, we are grieving, then the best leadership he could provide is honoring that request.
Yeah, well, we will see what he does tomorrow. Shannon Foley Martinez joining us tonight from our Washington offices, a former white supremacist, talking to us about how you can change the hearts and minds of people. And you start with your children. Shannon, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and your story. Thank you.